What if your wealth came with a warning? What if someone's been watching you, not to harm you, but to protect something bigger than you can see? And what if you were chosen to break a curse that's haunted generations? Capricorn, this isn't just a prediction. It's a message from the universe, delivered at the exact moment you're about to change everything. So don't scroll. This is your sign. Capricorn, you're about to drown in money, not in a negative sense, but in the most extraordinary way. Buried in abundance, success, and wealth beyond anything you've ever imagined. And maybe you felt it, that strange shift inside, that quiet hum that says something big is coming. But what if everything you thought was yours came with a hidden curse no one warned you about? What if someone out there has been silently watching you, not to hurt you, but to protect you, to guide you? And what if, just maybe, your whole future, your money, your love, your peace, depends on a decision you didn't even know you had to make? Sounds unreal, right? But stay with me, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a memory your soul's been trying to wake up to. Lucy wasn't lost, not exactly, but she was stuck. She woke up every day, did what she was supposed to do, paid the bills, smiled when needed. But deep down, she felt it, like an itch under the skin. Something was missing. Not love, not money, something deeper. Something was missing. Not love, not money, something deeper. No matter how hard she worked, how much she planned, it was like the universe kept saying not yet. And she believed maybe it was just bad luck, or maybe she was broken. Until that day a letter came. No return address, just her name written like someone knew her, really knew her. Inside was a single line that made her stop breathing. You were born to break this curse. And just like that, everything changed. The letter didn't explain much. No long story, no family tree, just a name, an address, and a key. Cold, old, and slightly rusted, like it had been waiting for decades. Lucy didn't know what she was stepping into. She just knew that deep down, she had to go. There was this tug in her chest, like someone whispering, "Go before it's too late." So she packed a bag, called in sick, and drove for hours, watching the city disappear in her rearview mirror as mountains rose like giants welcoming her into another world. When she arrived, the air was different. It smelled like pine and stories. The house stood quiet, proud, and heavy with secrets. It wasn't beautiful, not in the way magazines define it, but it had a soul, a presence, and somehow she didn't feel like a stranger. Inside, time had stopped. Dust rested gently on furniture that hadn't moved in years. There were photos on the wall, faces she didn't recognize, but somehow they felt familiar, like pieces of a dream she once had and forgot. On the kitchen table was a map, not a modern GPS printout, but a hand-drawn map with symbols and scribbled notes in fading ink. Next to it, a journal. First entry dated 1893. Last entry, the day before her letter arrived. That's when the chills really hit her. She flipped through the pages and saw stories, hard ones. Women who loved deeply but always lost. Men who built empires and watched them crumble. Children born into hope, swallowed by fear. And one sentence kept showing up again and again. The legacy must be broken before it breaks us. Lucy didn't fully understand it yet, but she knew this wasn't about some hidden treasure or old house drama. This was bigger, generational. Some kind of pain had been passed down like an invisible inheritance, and now it had reached her doorstep. She felt it, the same patterns, the same near misses, the same haunting feeling that no matter what she did, something was always off. And now, standing in the heart of it all, she finally had a chance to face it, to name it, and maybe, just maybe, to end it. But just as she was about to close the journal, something moved outside the window. It wasn't the wind. She walked slowly to the front door, heart racing like a drum, and there he was, a man standing at the edge of the porch. Not a stranger exactly. She had seen him before, once briefly at a library years ago. He'd handed her a book she dropped. Their hands touched. She remembered that. But why was he here now? He didn't speak, just looked at her with this mix of knowing and waiting, like he had been watching. Not in a creepy way, in a quiet, loyal kind of way. And suddenly she knew he wasn't new to this story. He was part of it, maybe even the missing piece. Maybe he had the other half of the code. Lucy sat down at the table, trying to steady her breath. What kind of family writes warnings in journals and sends letters from beyond the grave? But then again, what kind of pain lasts over 100 years? She thought about her mother, quiet, distant, always afraid of losing everything, and her grandmother, who used to say things like some doors shouldn't be opened without ever explaining why. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the door. The silence between generations wasn't just emotional, it was designed, protected, maybe even cursed. Lucy reached for the journal again and found a loose page tucked inside, one that had been folded, hidden. On it was a message. If you're reading this, you're the one. This curse ends with choice, not chance. Now it's your turn to choose. She felt a wave of fear and power, because choice meant responsibility, and maybe that's what her ancestors couldn't face. But she could. She had to. And just as that thought settled into her bones, the man outside took one step closer to the door. Lucy opened the door slowly, unsure whether to be afraid or relieved. The man didn't flinch. He just stood there, hands tucked in the pockets of his long coat, eyes steady like he'd been expecting her. There was something ancient in his stillness, like a man who had lived through too many stories to be easily shaken. "You must be Lucy," he said gently, his voice carrying weight but no threat. She nodded, too stunned to form a real answer. He introduced himself as Luke. Just Luke. No last name, no explanation. But there was something about the way he spoke. It wasn't rehearsed, but it wasn't casual either. Like he had been waiting for this exact moment for a long time. He asked if he could come in. And even though Lucy's brain screamed caution, her heart whispered yes. There are people you meet who feel familiar, even when they're strangers. Luke was one of them. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, eyes scanning the room like he'd been here before. And then he said the one thing that made her skin prickle. "I've been watching this house for 20 years. Not in a creepy way," he added quickly. More like guarding it. He told her about her grandfather, about how he had made mistakes, chased wealth and power, but in doing so had triggered a chain of consequences no one saw coming. And then Luke pulled out a worn notebook. Inside were names, dates, patterns, all tracing back to one truth. The curse didn't start with Lucy's family. It started long before that. This wasn't just about blood. It was about energy, repeated choices, generational cycles that kept spinning until someone finally said stop. And according to everything he had tracked, that someone was Lucy. At first it was too much history, too many expectations. She wasn't special. She didn't ask for this. She wasn't ready. But Luke reminded her, no one ever feels ready to break a pattern. That's what makes it hard. He pointed to her life, the patterns she had noticed but never explained. Failed relationships with the same emotional ending. Career moments that almost happened, but always slipped away. The constant pressure to be strong, even when she was breaking inside. It wasn't her fault, but it was now her responsibility. He walked her through old family letters, clipped newspaper articles, even audio tapes. Her ancestors had tried to leave breadcrumbs, each hoping the next one would be brave enough to finish what they couldn't. And now here she was, standing in the middle of a story she didn't write, but had the power to finish. Later that night, Lucy couldn't sleep. Her thoughts spun like a carousel. What if she failed? What if the curse wasn't even real? What if she was just imagining all of this? But deep down, something felt right. Like her entire life had been preparing her for this one moment of clarity. The next morning, she followed Luke through the woods behind the house to a hidden chapel, long abandoned but strangely intact. On the altar sat a box with the same symbol she had seen in the journal. Inside was a letter, handwritten, faded, but still readable. It was from her great-great-grandmother. She had written about a vision, about a child born in the winter who would carry both the burden and the light. Lucy froze. Her birthday was in January. But wait, there's something Lucy didn't know. Her birth date? Aligned with a rare cosmic event, one that only happens every 108 years. Luke placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said, and she believed him. Because for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel alone. She felt seen, known, supported. They spent the rest of the day uncovering more artifacts, symbols, stories, and each one brought her closer to understanding not just the curse, but the strength buried beneath it. The curse wasn't some dark magic. It was silence, suppression, generations of people not talking about their pain, pretending everything was fine, carrying shame like it was normal. Lucy realized the most dangerous part of the curse wasn't what it did. It was how it kept people quiet, and if she was going to break it, she'd have to speak, share, bring light to what had always been hidden. It wasn't going to be easy, but maybe, just maybe, she had already taken the hardest step by saying yes to the journey. That evening, they lit a fire in the old hearth. Lucy sat with her back against the wall, staring at the dancing flames. She asked Luke how he knew all of this, why he had chosen to stay so close to a house that wasn't his. He looked at her and said, "My family was part of this too. We were the watchers, the protectors. One of my great-uncles failed to help your grandfather when he needed it most, and that failure haunted us. So I made a vow that if the day ever came when someone returned to finish what was started, I would be here." Lucy felt a deep wave of emotion, grief for people she never met, gratitude for a stranger who had become her guide. They talked late into the night about patterns, forgiveness, healing. Luke reminded her that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing not to carry what broke you into your future. In that moment, she realized this wasn't just about ending pain, it was about reclaiming power. And that's when she knew. Tomorrow, they would begin the ritual, not to erase the past, but to honor it, release it, and finally move forward. The curse had a name now, and that meant it could be broken. The next morning, the sky was gray, and the air felt heavier. Lucy woke up with a knot in her stomach, like something was coming. Luke had already lit the fireplace and was going over some old documents they found tucked behind a false wall in the library. They were preparing for the ritual, something symbolic, a way to close the loop. But before they could begin, the past came knocking. Literally. A knock at the door stopped everything. When Lucy opened it, she froze. Standing there was Ben, her ex, the one who had left without warning 2 years ago. He looked tired, worn out, like someone who had seen ghosts. He said he was just passing through, but something in his voice didn't match the story. He looked around the house like he recognized it, even though he had never been there, and Lucy knew. This wasn't coincidence. Ben represented the final thread, the emotional tie that had never fully been cut, the relationship she had never gotten closure from. Luke stepped back, giving them space, and for a moment, time folded in on itself. Ben apologized, of course, told her he made a mistake, said he had never stopped thinking about her. The usual things people say when they feel regret. But Lucy wasn't the same woman anymore. She didn't need apologies. She needed honesty. So she asked him the one question that mattered. Why now? And that's when Ben looked away, because he didn't know, or maybe he did and didn't want to say it out loud, that something had pulled him here. Lucy felt the pull too, but not toward Ben, toward clarity, closure. She told him she forgave him, but she wasn't going back. Because this wasn't just about love lost, it was about cycles, and she was done repeating them. After Ben left, she and Luke went outside. There was a clearing behind the chapel where generations had once gathered. They stood at the center, facing each other, holding symbols from the house, a locket, a page from the journal, a candle that had never been lit. Together, they spoke words from the journal, not magic spells, but intentions, a promise to end the silence, a vow to live awake. As the candle lit, the wind shifted. Birds took off from the trees, and Lucy felt something loosen inside her chest. The ritual wasn't flashy, no lightning, no thunder, but it was real. Something had ended, or maybe something had finally begun. That night, under a sky filled with stars, Luke and Lucy sat on the porch wrapped in blankets and quiet. They talked about the future, not with big dreams or detailed plans, but with hope, with peace. Lucy admitted she hadn't believed in love for a long time. Not real love, not the kind that stayed. But Luke smiled and said, "Real love doesn't stay because it has to. It stays because it chooses to every day." And that stuck with her, because it didn't sound poetic. It sounded true. Luke didn't promise to fix her life. He didn't need her to fix his dot. Real love doesn't fix you. It holds you steady while you do the work. They were just there, whole, even in their mess. They made dinner together. Simple food, pasta and vegetables from the local market, and it tasted better than anything Lucy had eaten in years. Not because of the recipe, but because it was shared, easy, honest. Later, as they cleaned up, Luke reached for her hand, not urgently, just steady like an anchor. And for the first time in years, Lucy didn't flinch. She didn't wonder if she was enough. She didn't wait for the other shoe to drop. She just stood there, present, loved. They didn't talk about what would happen next. They didn't need to, because in that moment, everything made sense. She had broken the curse, not by casting it out, but by refusing to carry it forward. You don't break a curse by fighting it. You break it by refusing to pass it on. And in doing so, she had made space for something new. Not perfect, but real. That night, they slept in separate rooms, not because of distance, but respect. And that too was love. The kind that doesn't rush, but roots. The kind that doesn't demand, but offers. The kind that feels like coming home to yourself. The next morning, Lucy woke up before sunrise. The air felt cleaner, sharper, like the storm had passed through and left something sacred behind. She walked barefoot into the clearing again, this time alone. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't uncertain. She took a deep breath and whispered thank you to the trees, to the soil, to the ancestors who had left messages tucked into shadows. It wasn't about burning the past anymore. It was about making peace with it. Luke joined her later with 2 cups of coffee. No words were exchanged, just presence. That was enough. They sat together and watched the light break through the tree line, golden and slow. Lucy thought about how far she had come, not just miles, but mindsets. She had once believed love was performance, that worth had to be earned. Now she knew better. Now she understood that love, real love, makes space for healing, for silence, for truth. Luke wasn't her savior. He was her mirror, a witness to her becoming, and she was ready to walk forward, no longer carrying what never belonged to her in the first place. When Lucy got back to the city, nothing looked the same. The streets were familiar, the buildings hadn't changed, but she had. She didn't return to her old apartment right away. Instead, she stayed with a friend for a few days, giving herself space to adjust. Healing doesn't look heroic. It looks like making tea when you want to disappear. Everything felt louder, faster, and strangely artificial. After days in the mountains surrounded by stillness, truth, and real connection, it was like the world had turned up the volume on everything fake. She walked through the city with new eyes, billboards screaming for attention, people glued to their phones, conversations filled with surface-level noise but no depth. Lucy didn't judge it. She just no longer wanted to live inside it. Not in the same way. She made a decision, one she never would have made before. She quit her job, not dramatically, no fireworks, just a quiet, intentional exit. It wasn't about running away, it was about creating space to build something real. She started small, a blog, sharing bits of her journey, not as a guru or coach, but as someone simply telling the truth. She wrote about pain, patterns, healing, and hope. To her surprise, people responded. Messages poured in from strangers saying thank you, saying me too. 3 months later, Lucy's blog had over 100,000 subscribers. One day she got an email, an invitation to speak on a podcast that once saved her own life. And for the first time, Lucy realized the power of her voice. She wasn't here to be perfect. She was here to be honest. And in that honesty, she was building something, a community, a mirror, a movement. At night, she still lit the candle she had brought back from the house. A small flame in her tiny new apartment, but it reminded her of who she was becoming. She began studying healing, not just energy work or therapy, but the science of patterns, the biology of belief, the power of storytelling. Each book, each course, each late-night journal entry added a brick to her new foundation. One day, Luke visited. They walked through a local farmer's market and talked about starting something together. A center, maybe. A space where people could rest, reset, and remember who they were. It wasn't about saving anyone, just holding space, offering permission, letting people know they weren't alone. And then came the numbers. Not by accident. Lucy started seeing them everywhere. On receipts, street signs, clocks, license plates. 8, 11, 13, 22. At first, she thought it was a coincidence, but after a while it became impossible to ignore. So she looked them up, dug into numerology, astrology, symbols her ancestors once drew on parchment and etched into wooden beams. She learned that 8 was the number of power and abundance, not just financial, but spiritual wealth. 11 was the portal, the gateway to intuition, insight, and spiritual awakening. 13, often misunderstood, was about transformation, the end of something false to make room for what's true. And 22? That was the master builder, the architect of dreams turned into reality. Lucy began to align her days with intention. She scheduled meetings on the 11th, started projects on the 22nd, spoke affirmations at 8:08 each morning. Not because she believed numbers held magic by themselves, but because they anchored her choices. They reminded her she was part of something bigger, a rhythm, a pattern, a design. She shared what she learned, not to preach, but to invite. And people listened, not because she shouted the loudest, but because her story was real. And in a world that felt increasingly artificial, real was revolutionary. One afternoon, while sitting at a small cafe she had never noticed before, Lucy overheard a young woman talking to a friend at the next table. She was saying how she felt stuck, how nothing she tried worked, how it felt like something invisible kept pulling her back. Lucy didn't interrupt. She just listened, and in that moment, she remembered what it felt like to be that girl. Lost, confused, tired of trying. Later that evening, she wrote a new blog post titled "The Invisible Weight." It was raw and personal. It didn't try to fix anything. It just named the feeling. And that alone gave people permission to breathe again. That post went viral. Not because it was flashy, but because it was honest. Lucy realized healing wasn't about perfection. It was about presence, about being real in a world full of performance. She started creating guided meditations, short audio messages, even live calls where people could simply show up and be heard. And slowly, the vision she and Luke had dreamed about started taking shape. A center, a sanctuary, a soft place to land, built not on hype or hustle, but on truth, intention, and human connection. It wasn't just about numbers anymore. It was about impact, ripples, legacy. And Lucy? She had finally found her rhythm, her power, her purpose. And it all began with a curse, one she now knew had only ever been a calling in disguise. Some stories don't end with fireworks. They end with a quiet breath, a gentle knowing, a sense that something heavy has finally been put down. For Lucy, that moment came on a Sunday morning, sitting by the window with a cup of tea and no noise in her head. She looked around her apartment, small, simple, full of light, and felt peace in a way she hadn't in years. Not the kind that comes and goes, but the kind that stays. She realized she didn't need to chase healing anymore. She had become it. Every choice, every step, even the stumbles, had brought her here. She thought about the house, the journal, the curse. All of it once felt like a burden, but now it felt like a gift. A strange, beautiful inheritance that gave her a second chance at herself. And she thought about the people still stuck in their own invisible loops. The ones who wake up every day wondering why things feel off. She wanted them to know, it's not just you. You're not broken, you're just carrying stories that were never yours to begin with. And you get to put them down. You get to write something new. That was the real magic. Not in spells or symbols, but in the decision to stop repeating what hurt and start creating what heals. Lucy didn't have all the answers. She didn't need them. What she had was clarity, a deep trust in the timing of things. Some people heal in silence, others in community, some through tears, others through art, music, movement. There's no one way through. But there is one truth that always holds. You are not here by accident. You are here because someone before you prayed for you to rise. And now, it's your turn to choose, to change, to carry light into places that have long been dark. Lucy stepped outside barefoot on the grass. The sun was rising, the world kept spinning, and she was ready to meet it, fully awake, fully alive. She had broken the curse, not because she was fearless, but because she showed up anyway. And maybe that's all any of us are being asked to do. Show up, tell the truth, stay soft, keep going. That week, Lucy wrote her final journal entry in the same notebook she had carried since the beginning of her journey. She wrote not to conclude, but to mark a turning point. A quiet ceremony between her and the version of herself that once didn't believe any of this was possible. She wrote about fear, how it used to own her mornings, dictate her relationships, color her decisions, and how now it was just a visitor, a voice she could choose to ignore. She wrote about love, not the cinematic kind, but the love that shows up with groceries when you're tired, that listens when you ramble, that stays even when it's not convenient. She wrote about truth, how scary it had been to say things out loud, but how powerful it felt to finally hear her own voice echo back in clarity. She ended the entry with a single line: I am no longer waiting for the light. I am the light. The next day, she received an email from a reader, a woman across the country who had stumbled onto her blog during a late-night search for peace. She thanked Lucy not for the advice, but for the honesty, for naming the things no one else had dared to say, for being real in a world addicted to the highlight reel. Lucy closed her laptop and smiled. She had no idea what came next, but she was no longer afraid of the unknown. She had learned how to live without a script, and in doing so, had finally stepped into the story she was always meant to tell.